It is politically very effective to be a massive racist. Anybody in any doubt at all about that has not noticed Donald Trump, who offers pretty much nothing to the American people except permission to be vile again, permission to resurrect all of the prejudices and all of the bigotries that the civil rights movement had done and has done so much for so many years to diffuse and dilute. And it never goes away. The invitation to hate is always irresistible to some people. It's hard to pin down exactly how many. You're going to get 10 to 15% of any electorate who will prioritise racism or prioritise abuse of foreigners, abuse of expats or immigrants, or whatever word you prefer, even and up to and including refugees. That invitation will always be irresistible to a section of the population. And in the hands of a skilled operator, and I don't really know what the skills are, but you know the difference, for example, between a Nigel Farage and a Nick Griffin, in the hands of a skilled operator, it will move beyond that 10 to 15%. And then you get some insidious truths that are always ignored by proponents of this kind of prejudice, that it is, for example, a working class concern, that the working class are racist and it is important to speak up for them, which is something you will be routinely told by middle and upper class racists who are lying, because the other crucial constituent of racism is lies. It is always lies, because what you are doing is imposing a hierarchy of humanity according to completely negligible differences, according to things that do not make a difference to your value as a human being, but you must pretend that they do. In fact, one of the people on the sort of letterhead at the so-called think tank to which Suella Braverman elected to give this speech yesterday is a eugenicist, someone that tries to impose some sort of intellectual rationale upon racism, and that is something that you see happen quite a lot from people absolutely furious about being called racist while espousing racism. That's the only thing that saves us really from the abyss in this country, is that people didn't take Steve Bannon's advice and start wearing their racism proudly on their lapel. Although yesterday, the Home Secretary, herself, of course, a woman of colour and the child of migrants, came perilously close to doing what Steve Bannon told them to do in the aftermath of the Brexit vote, and wearing racism proudly on her lapel, because she talked about people as if there is an effective hierarchy of humanity, as if where you come from or your access to or right to everything from education to hospital treatment is in some sense determined by where you were born or where your parents were born. What's very odd about it, what's very difficult about it intellectually and emotionally, is the fact that for many people that might subscribe to her bogus notion of human hierarchy, she would be, and her parents would be considered inferior. That's the mad thing. So the critics of Suella Braverman, and I am one of them, have to argue that she is every bit as welcome here and as valid a contributor to British society as I am. That's what her critics have to argue. Her critics have to defend her from the accusations of inferiority that will be levelled at her by people to whom she seeks to appeal with this rhetoric. That's the bit I can't quite get my head around. I mean, listen, it's got nothing to do with her skin colour. It's got to do with her family history of immigration. So Dominic Raab, for example, is the son of a refugee as well, and arrived at some pretty grim opinions about how refugees should be treated. So it's not about that. It's very simply about what the people she's appealing to think of people like her family. Because if you're not imposing a hierarchy of humanity, what are you doing? And that's where the comments about multiculturalism become incomprehensible to me. Incomprehensible to me. The idea that the so-called multiculturalism, which I take to mean lots of people from different backgrounds and with different beliefs muddling along together and getting on pretty well. All of the statistical evidence is that the word that is generally used is integration is better or faster or at higher levels than it has ever been before. The idea that this woman in particular can stand up and say that multiculturalism has failed when she is a walking, talking exemplar of its success, isn't she? I mean, isn't that the point? Isn't the point that she, as the Home Secretary, the daughter, I think, of South Goan Indians who came here via Mauritius and Kenya, respectively, serves as Home Secretary in the cabinet of a Hindu Prime Minister whose parents also emigrated here from a former colony, from overseas. That to me is a fairly potent argument that she is proof that multiculturalism has succeeded. And that's where it gets mad for the Tories as well, because they point to people like Suella Braverman, quite rightly, and people like Dominic Raab, and people like Rishi Sunak, and people like James Cleverly, and people like Priti Patel. I'll stop doing that thing with my voice now. I don't want to set your car alarm off. As proof, I don't think it's a powerful argument that it proves racism is not in place, or it proves racism is in abeyance. Wherever you're from and whatever you look like, if you say things that racists like, they're going to look a little bit more kindly upon you than if you call them out for what they are. But they are walking, talking proof, surely, of the success of multiculturalism. Hugo Rifkin, the Times columnist, puts it brilliantly. It's remarkable to hear Braverman say multiculturalism has failed. She's a British Home Secretary descended from Goan Indians from Mauritius and Kenya, married to a Jewish husband in a government headed by Britain's first Hindu Prime Minister. What would successful multiculturalism look like? And Satnam Sanghera, his colleague at the Times and the author of Empireland, goes a little further. He says it was only a matter of time before one of the brown Tories vying for leadership claimed that multiculturalism has failed. This is not related to any kind of reality. It's about campaigning to be leader, making the party's mostly white, often extremely right-wing members feel like it's okay to spout this nonsense. He doesn't use the word nonsense. He is a little more Anglo-Saxon in his expressions. So those are the facts. Those are the facts. You have, and I think this is a description we will return to in the course of the morning's programme because it's powerful, right? It's resonant. A British Home Secretary descended from Goan Indians from Mauritius and Kenya, married to a Jewish husband in a government headed by Britain's first Hindu Prime Minister, himself the son of immigrants, says that multiculturalism has failed. What is she talking about? This is horrible stuff. This is really horrible stuff. You can trace what Suella Braverman said in America yesterday right back to the decision by media owners and others to allow Nigel Farage into the public space and to roll out red carpets for him from the BBC down. You can trace it all back to that. And you know, there's misogyny and homophobia in there as well. You can't offer up asylum to people who will be persecuted for their sexuality. A grand total, I think, of just over 400 people received asylum or were offered asylum in part because of the persecution they would receive. People get thrown off buildings in some countries for being gay. They get jailed. You know, and so the racism and the misogyny and the homophobia, they go hand in hand. And it's horrible to see it in the public space at this level of government. Dawn Butler, the Labour MP, suggested to me some time ago that a white politician couldn't or wouldn't say some of the stuff that Suella Braverman says. It was a controversial comment that I'm not 100% comfortable with as a white person. I don't know that I could make that claim, make that point, because it flirts, doesn't it, with the idea that somebody's skin colour should determine what they can and can't say. And that's obviously a fairly horrible conclusion. But the boldness of yesterday's statements, which I think have more to do with the next battle to be Conservative leader than they do with anything else, they are stunning to me. Stunning and deeply, deeply saddening. Because it's a beast that can never be sated. You know? You could, as I suspect she will call for soon, you could reduce immigration into this country to tiny numbers. And you would then turn upon people like her, you see, people whose parents came here. So you stop people coming here. That doesn't feed the appetite of that 10, 15%, that sort of what you might call that Faragist rump. There's nothing you can do to quell those hatreds because they are deep and they are ancient. They are defining for some people. It is part of their personality. Without it, they have nothing. Twitter has been a wonderful introduction for some of us to just how deep these bigotries and biases go. It's all they are. It's all they have. It's who they are. And they don't turn that off when immigration comes down to 50,000 or 20,000 or nil. It's still there. They just turn it on somebody else. And it won't always be race, which is why misogyny and homophobia always go hand in hand with these sort of outcomes. So what is she talking about? Honestly, a British Home Secretary descended from Goan Indians from Mauritius and Kenya, married to a Jewish husband in a government headed by Britain's first Hindu Prime Minister, himself the son of immigrants, is telling you that multiculturalism has failed. Why?